Cooking degrades nutrients. So we go back to what I just mentioned a moment ago. I don't know why people are questioning this. I know there's a lot of people that are having a struggle moving on to a pure, uncooked, whole food, plant-based diet. And I get that. And you have a lot of naysayers out there, conventional doctors, even some of the so-called holistic doctors, tell, oh, it's too hard for your intestinal tract. Then they go back and they recite biblically Ayurvedic medicine and body types. And they talk about, the reality is that is antiquated philosophical jargon. Today, we have strong evidence that the only fuel that your intestinal tract loves to create healthy bacteria in, which, by the way, is everything for immunity and psychology, is raw, green, in great part, plant-based, cellulose-rich food. Now, this one, we're just going to talk about a very common, you call it a vegetable, but it's really not. It's a fruit, tomatoes, or tomatoes, as you say. If you look at the carotenoids and the vitamin C and the provitamin A in this, they're completely shot by the time you cook it. Now, in books I write for the academic community, I have volumes of evidential science on this. As a matter of fact, I could do a 55-hour conference and just give study after study after study on how when you cook something, the proteins are destroyed in great part, the vitamins are literally gone in great part, the minerals are disturbed in great part, and more importantly, the oils, which are inherently in every whole food, become carcinogens and in part contribute to cardiovascular disorders. But more important to us, because our clear science shows us that the 4 elements in food that keeps you young, prevents disease, and by the way, helps you reverse disease, are hormones, completely shot when cooking, oxygen, when you're smelling the food as you cook it, the oxygen molecule is what you're actually inhaling. Phytochemicals, the extraordinary medicines we found in raw plant-based organic foods, and enzymes. We call it HOPE. So you destroy the hormones, oxygen, phytochemicals, and enzymes. Beyond the fact that's not discussed in mainstream nutritional science, it is what we will discuss in the future because it's future science and it's quantum biology. Low nutrient, low caloric foods, health and longevity. Eating foods that are fried, so here we call it the Southern diet, but it's the Southern diet, unfortunately, pervades the entire society worldwide. This is fried food, and we mentioned early on that even fried potatoes are going to give you more depression, more anxiety. But high sugary drinks are directly linked to early death. Now, why do we need studies on this? It's common sense because sadly, most people don't hear it. Most people are eating this way and they will have advocates. So today with the advent of Google and the advent of the internet, you can get on and whatever your idea is and whatever your philosophy is, you'll find somebody that will support that. And then you'll, in fact, say it's perfectly fine because Dr. X or Dr. Y said it's good for you. The clear science, the evidential science, recent science shows you that's completely nonsense. Kaminsky and German in this particular study were very articulate on the matter. They said this is one of the greatest global catastrophes we have today. Our health conditions, chronic health conditions, even sleep disorders come from this consumption of non-food. It's poison, it's noxious is what it really is. Association between ultra-processed food intake and all-cause mortality, death, and systematic review of a meta-analysis. Now, what is a meta-analysis? I mention this periodically. Those of us who read science on an ongoing basis really don't trust individual scientific studies unless we know the doctors, the scientists, the organizations, or the institutions that have done those studies, and they're reputable and we trust them. They're very, very hard to find today because science is pretty much bankrolled by people with vested interest. When I say pretty much, that's an understatement, almost in total bankrolled by people who have an objective when they go in to do the science. So when you have meta studies, they take 20, 30, 50, 100. I've seen meta studies where they looked at 1,000, 1,500 studies. And then somebody who's very, very sharp data analysis person, statistical data analysis person, sits back and looks at the commonality of everything that was discovered in every one of those studies. So there may be one common or two common or three or maybe 10 common things that every one of those studies came up and concluded was what they discovered. But if you looked at 1,000 studies, they could all have totally different outcomes. So you could look at 1,000 studies and their analysis of what they have just studied could have a different outcome. One could say the sky is blue, one could say the sky is yellow, one could say the sky is red. But when you look at the deep knowledge that is harvested from these studies, this is what they see. So what they found is sugar sweetened beverages, artificially sweetened beverage, processed meats, etc., are really high cause mortality. Now, this doesn't surprise me because even the World Health Organization, who is not always that ethical, but at times do great things, had to jump in a few years ago when they looked at processed meats. In this case, they looked at bacon. And this was even surprising to me, as bad as I knew bacon was. They said 2 pieces of bacon a week. Listen to this, 2 pieces of bacon a week. Literally, you'll increase colorectal cancer by 15%. Who eats 2 pieces of bacon? Maybe you eat 5 or 6 or 10 pieces of bacon a day if you're eating it. Substitution of unprocessed and processed red meat with poultry or fish in total and cause specific mortality. When people say, well, I don't eat meat, I eat chicken. Well, let's remind you that chicken is a small meat. I don't eat red meat, I eat fish. Let me remind you that fish is a swimming meat. And all of these increase heart problems, etc., with no question, and this study shows it. So you increase heart problems, there's no difference. And in the case of chicken, it was actually relevant enough to say to you that it actually got worse when people consumed chicken. And I don't care if it's so-called free range, that is a sales pitch for wealthy white people. The fact is there's no such thing as a healthy chicken for a human being. We're not supposed to be eating chicken or fish or eggs or milk from another species or red meat or pork or wild game. Off the table, don't need it. It's dead. And let's hope to God it's dead in your mind and your soul, and you get over the emotionality of consuming these things. When replacing red meat with poultry, there was a slight decrease in cancer, but not anything to talk about. Plant foods fight cancer. Now, this is something we know because all nutrients come from plants. Now, let's go back and remind everyone who says, oh, well, I get a lot of nutrients from eating, a steak or from eating fish. No, all of those animals contracted and gained their nutrients from plants. In the case of aquatic life, they got it from algae and sea vegetables, as we call them. In the case of a cow or a pig, they got it from land-based plants. So when you have higher amounts of micronutrients in spices and food, like vitamin C, vitamin D, vitamin E, in a healthy lifestyle, numerous investigations, like endless investigations, show that you increase life expectancy and fight cancer. Now, why? Because within the cells of these plants, we successfully fight off the mutagenic factors of cancer. So as the cancer is literally starting to fight, the plant comes in and beats it at that point. Now, here's one I really want you to look at. Last year at The Real Truth, I did an hour-and-a-half program on this. Your inside is you, and we got into detail. But this is the latest data that just came out. Now, I want you to look at this closely. So up at the top, right and left. So we look at metabolites on one side, lasting glucose, insulin sensitivity, total LDL, low density lipid, and short chain fatty acids on one side. And this all has to do with metabolism, and it all has to do with the brain. Behavior and cognitive, motivational cognitive processes, all of these up the side. Brain activity for language, empathy, related task, emotional health, and personality traits. All have to do with the quality and amount and strength of healthy bacteria from the gut. Now, I mentioned it before, but it's worth mentioning once again. Your three families, Provotella, Bacteroides, and Rhumococcus, are the families of bacteria within the intestinal flora and fauna. Their food is cellulose, raw cellulose. Now think just for a minute. Once I cook it, think about the difference between a cooked spinach and how limp it is, and a raw spinach. Doesn't even look like the same plant at all. And there's a need for your body to have the water-rich, enzyme-rich, nutrient-rich, phytochemical-rich life, green plant in your intestinal tract. Study after study show that people that consume higher amounts of green, organic, plant-based foods have better psychology, better immunology. And right here on the ground, we've been proving that now since the middle of the 20th century. Because when we put people on these organic, raw, plant-based foods, we see their bodies instantaneously respond. Oh, they don't have to be scientifically probed to do it. They don't have to be educated to do it. They've been waiting for your whole life to get the fuel that was meant to be fed to them. And then we see that immune system fight that disorder back. And then once it does that job successfully, it stands guard to protect you from disorders. We see the mind change. This was sort of perplexing to us here for decades. People's attitudes, minds, perspective, vision would dramatically change almost across the board with all of the thousands and tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of people we've worked with over the decades. And now we realize why. Because this fuel went up to their brain, turned on the serotonin receptor site, and got everything you see up in behavior and cognition in working order once again.